So, Jonathan, what are some of the core challenges that we're seeing today in the financial service market?
I think there's probably two that I can think of. There's a number, but two instant ones. The first one I think comes around to trust. There's been a lot of interesting press, if I can put it that way, from some elements of the financial services industry. And I think people wouldn't necessarily disassociate a trading arm with a retail bank arm. So I think there's some definite elements of concerns about, are they reliable, are they safe? I suppose also with some of the banks that actually did go into liquidation as well in 2008, that period of time. So that there is a concern from a consumer point of view. The other piece is not just in financial services, but I think it's fair to say we're becoming more discerning consumers now. People are very interested in choice. People are very, everyone is looking at should they do this, should they do that. And I think what was interesting was, the current account switching service just over a year ago. And I think it was last week I saw in the papers that 1.2 million people have switched current accounts. And that's actually, when you sit there, and I think for a long time people were saying, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And if you look, there's some very active switches in other markets, mobile phones and utilities, and I think we'll start to see that happening. So I think on the one hand, the trust element, the second one, you've got more discerning clients, and I think both of those are going to put pressures on the financial services industries just to meet the expectations and to retain customers.
Can you tell us a little bit about Nexedia's offering to the financial services sector?
Nexedia is a analytics business intelligence company. Our whole purpose is to take data, structure it, and then analyse it to present insight to companies. And one of the strong sectors for us markets for us has been contact centres. And there I would say we've had success because we can show people what's happening in their calls, to do things like process improvement, or to understand the voice of the customer, or to use it as a performance tool. I think where it becomes particularly relevant to the financial services industry is, of course, they are a regulated industry. To an extent, other industries aren't. And so there they do have like a regulatory oversight, some may say a compliance burden, depending on how you view it. And the challenge has always been, how do you do that effectively? So whilst we've always been able to improve like the general contact centre performance, what we're able to do is now turn around and say, well, we can take all of your interactions and analyse them and present data to you, so that from a regulatory viewpoint you can go back to the regulation saying we aren't doing that. If let's say we're going back to the idea of switching accounts, and if they were trying to make it difficult to switch accounts, and people say we've got complaints about this, they can go back and say, well, we've gone through all of our calls for the last 2 months and can't find anyone saying you've made it hard for us to switch accounts. So I think the relevance for financial services is definitely through that compliance piece. The second area is when, and it's probably also a good example coming back to the current accounts, the technology can produce data that can support churn modelling. So if 1.2 million people have moved bank accounts over the last year, I will guarantee you the numbers for the next year are probably going to be double that, if not more. And now some of them may be customers the banks will be quite happy to lose. Others will be ones they want to keep. So again, the data from all of the customer interactions they have can then go into to improve and build predictive churn models. So that becomes another area where I think it plays for financial services. And the third then is just actually, before you get to churn modelling, before you get to then people talking about going, actually, I just want to understand my customers, I understand the customer experience, customer sentiment, customer journey, customer effort, any of those labels, it all comes back down to how do my customers perceive me? And I think all of the banks are looking to become trusted. They're looking to probably take more of the wallet. They're trying to sell more and more of the services. They're restricted on some they can sell because of advice sales and non-advice sales. But basically, the analytics can show them what the customer sentiment, what the customers are feeling about them, and then also use that to go back to propensity models to really improve how they can sell to customers.
How have you seen some of the demands of customers really evolve over the last few years? Would you say there's more demand now on digital channels?
The easy answer is yes, because the demand was so low for a long time. The interesting thing with the digital channels is, if you think about financial services, one of their driving concerns is all security, the safety of a bank, the safety of your money, fraud. And I think the digital channels have always been attractive to them, but I think they've also sometimes struggled to say, how can we use them? Because if I can't go through an ID&V process, The digital channels can only do so much. And I think a lot of them have been piloting some of these channels, and they've been effective, but they've had their limitations. And typically, it's been I know one example when they've offered the ability to do web chats, but the web chats are done on an unvalidated approach. So some of the things you want to do, you can't do, or some of the questions you want to ask, they can't answer in a web chat. So whilst it goes some way to improving their efficiencies or the customer experience, it has limitations. And I think people have actually, what's happened probably in the last year or so is that people go, actually, no, we do need to embrace these channels. And as those channels come, I suppose, more mainstream into the way the banks treat them, then I think that's how they're becoming evolving as mature channels. So that's been, from my view, that's the main change we've seen happening over the last couple of years.
And do you think, particularly in the retail banking side of things, do you think that infrastructure is currently able to cope with the demand for digital channels? Somewhat.
I think in somewhat. There are some elements that can come in quite quickly. I think others, and I suppose a classic one is some of the idea of social channels. I think there's still a way to go to understand how those can be brought into the mainstream of the bank's operations.
What really, in your opinion, is the absolute core of running a cost-effective contact centre, but while still delivering a superb customer experience?
I was at an event we ran yesterday, and this was one of the topics we talked about, and I was reminded of a quote, I think it's from Peter Drucker, and he was saying, management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. And I think those map to efficiency and effectiveness. The challenge for contact centres is probably for the last 5 years they've been driven on efficiency, how to be cost effective. Most organisations have become very efficient, but I think they've become efficient to some degree to this, the cost of effectiveness. If there are a number of handoffs to complete a process, you've got opportunities for failure. Therefore, the customer will go, I was expecting you to do X. And if the first person said, yeah, I'll handle that, but passes it off and then passes it off, if one of those fails, then the customer expectation has failed. So you can say, I have produced a very efficient process, but from a customer viewpoint, it's not effective. It will cause me to call back, recontact you. And therefore, actually, it's not as efficient as we think it is. So I think the real challenge is most organisations have done great jobs at managing costs. They understand the cost drivers, they understand the call volumes, they've moved as many contacts as they can to some form of self-service channel, but I think they've done it probably to they've sacrificed effectiveness. The change is people are trying to measure the two. Now, difficult balancing act, because a lot of the effectiveness you talk about, people go, well, what's the business case for the classic one is customer experience. If you say I want to be the best at customer experience, you go, okay, what's the business rationale? Why do that? And there's been a lot of case studies saying, well, actually, delighted customers spend more, and delighted employees lead to delighted customers. So I think that there's reasons to do it, but the challenge is to say, against the hard numbers of efficiency, that's going to cost. How do I manage that? And I think the answer to the question really is you need to have a really good insight as to what goes on in your customer contact centres. And the insight isn't just how many contacts I get and when I get them, but it's what are those contacts? What are they about? What are the topics they are? What are the drivers for repeat contacts? And all those areas. And I think if you can find a way of taking all of that data and saying, right, this is what is happening, this is not only this is what is happening, but this is why it is happening, then you can overlay both the efficiency onto the effectiveness. And I think that's the way people have to go with their contact centers now. There's very little cost to take out. You've just got to become far more effective at what you do, and really focus on what it is that's going to improve the customer experience, and that way drive down cost. And so I think they all have to be far more effective at what they do in order to run a cost-efficient contact centre that actually delivers what the customers want.
We're seeing a much more connected customer making better use of channels such as social media. How do you think banks and financial service firms can make full use of this channel, both for responding to customers but also as a potential source of information?
I think it's very interesting to see the development of those channels, especially the social media channels, because my experience is they're being adopted within organisations nearly always by the marketing department. The marketing department sees sees it has value to them. And I think the challenge for the banks is to integrate them into their operations and to not learn or not have to relearn all the lessons they learned from the contact centres. So, the contact centres were set up, depending on who you talk, but they've been going 30, 40 years in some instances. And people have slowly worked out, you've got to check the quality of the service you deliver. You've got to check the consistency of what you deliver. You've got to check the regulatory compliance of what you do. And so there's been a whole ecosystem supporting the way the contact centres work. And the digital channel, social media channels certainly have come up as a new channel, and they're normally being run separate to the contact. Sometimes the teams in the contact, but a lot of them are separate. And the danger is all of the lessons learned from the development of contact centres are forgotten, and then people will make the same mistakes and say, and you potentially could. And I think the downside for some of the social channels is if someone puts out a really bad tweet, that tweet can be seen very quickly by a lot of people. And in a way that one bad call in a contact centre takes far longer to propagate. So I think that the challenge for the banks is to say there are learnings from what we've done on our previous contact channels. Let's make sure we apply those as appropriate to those digital channels. And really, it's coming back to they need to do a proper job of integrating it into the business rather than saying it's maybe to begin with you have it as a standalone because that's the easiest way to start an interaction with social media and that type of digital channels. But I think you'd have to look to see bring it in to have a consistent delivery to customers. We did some research about 2 years ago, and I think a high 90% of contact centre calls or call centres, shall I say, have some form of performance and quality monitoring going on. When you look at the social channels, that was, I think, in those days it was under about 20%. And so there's some very simple lessons that you can learn from that actually you do need to monitor how people are saying what they're saying, so that the bank doesn't get exposed in that way.
We're starting to see a lot more IVR and smart IVR systems being put in place. Mm-hmm. Where do you think these sit when compared to real people?
I think the best place for them to sit is where the customer wants them to sit. I think one of the challenges with any form of self-service is that there is normally a view from organisations saying, if I look at all my transactions, you go, those are really classic transactions. They're very simple things. They'd be far more effective or far more efficient, even how we want to view it, as self-service. There may be a percentage of customers who's delighted to do that. There may be a percentage of customers who never want to, they always want to ring up for a balance. That's just one of the things they do. So I think there is a huge ability to improve the cost models through moving a lot of these things to these intelligent channels. The danger is if you say the only way to do X is through that channel, then you can start to alienate your customers. But I do believe that some of this is a generational thing. I think that there are some people who will never want to go down an IVR route. They'll go straight to a smart app route. But I think it's understanding your customers and allowing them to do what they want, making not forcing them down a channel and saying you have to do this or there's no other option. I think but the challenge is to do that, as there's some people who you do want to go there, is how you take those people to those new channels. But I think they've got huge potential, but I think they need to be done from, I suppose classically, it's going to be from an outside-in view of what's going on. It's what your customers want to do, not, this is what is good for our organisation and therefore everyone has to go through that one route.
How would you actually look at deciding this customer would prefer IVR, this customer wouldn't?
I think it's probably it's one of those. It's very hard because you have to start doing some form of customer segmentation, and some of it could be demographic based, some of it could be some of the behaviours that they're doing. For example, if you found one of your customers who was already on social media, you knew that they've got a leaning to one view or the other. So I think you need to start to do some form of segmentation of your customers, and then also I think you probably need to have a very good communication strategy with some of them to say, actually, are you aware that you can do this transaction online, or you can do this through the IVR? Some of the experience we've seen is that when people are trying to promote new channels, they're not necessarily as consistent in the promotion when the customer comes through to them, and you need to turn around and go, right, you've got to deal with that customer's issue, whatever they've called for, you've got to resolve it, solve it, deliver the service they want. But it probably is worth the extra 10 seconds or 15 seconds at the end of the call to do the education piece as well, so that they're more likely to use it.
unifying communications has always been a major problem for, well, not just banks, but any organisation.
Yeah.
What do you think is really holding banks back from actually achieving this and achieving this complete view of the customer?
There's been two challenges. One of them is just the classic technology challenge. Some of these things aren't as easy to integrate as we like to think they are. And if you look at some of the technology, like the CTI technology that was meant to bring all of this together, one of the challenges that was whilst IT could have been driving it, the bank was saying, okay, what's the value to us? You know, if I can have all this data, what am I going to do with it? And I think what we're seeing now is people are actually far more interested in understanding this complete view of the customer. So whether it's, you know, whether you do customer profiling or customer journey mapping, all people are trying to say, no, we need to understand our customers. We're trying to integrate this data. And I think that now is saying, they're then asking questions, and they said, oh, well, if we could link A to B or that data source to that data source, then that becomes a reality. So I think it's been twofold. It's that the technology cost driver for one side and a lack of a demand. And I think what we're seeing now is that the demand is starting to come through. You know, as customers become more discerning, banks have got to reflect more on the customers, how they serve the customers, and to do that they need greater understanding of their customers, and to do that they need to integrate their data. The idea of being able to identify a customer regardless of channel, there's still some challenges there, because you know, some people's digital personas aren't who they are and all that, but I think there's some challenges there. But I think if you can bring that all together, then you get that view of the customer. So I think that's why we're starting to see some of the challenges that have stopped the whole unified comms, the whole CRM integration happening in the past, starting to be eroded.
What lessons, more from a sort of a social standpoint, do you think that finance can learn from other verticals?
The most important lesson from the social world is consistency. You know, if you say you're going to do it, you've got to do it, and you've got to do it. And if you say I have a brand value of respecting the customer, then your digital channels you've got to live up to the brand values. So I think it's one of those ones, really simple to say, harder to do. But I think what they need to do is to make sure that the social channels are consistent, have the same. I still think one of the worst things people can do with social is if you've got a 20-minute queue, for argument's sake, in the call centre, and then you go, but don't worry, if you go on social, you'll get around it immediately. It's, you know, this differentiation of service. I think that you need to make sure that you have a consistent quality of service, a consistent service offering, consistent branding across those channels.
Lastly, in very broad terms, how do you see the financial service environment really evolving over the next 5 years or so?
I think the main change that's going to evolve, especially from their contact centre operation viewpoint, but is the fact that to deliver the service that people are expecting, I think you're going to have to empower people to do far more at the point of contact. Okay. So if you go in and say, I want to change my address, simple, you know, something like that, it's got to be done, I think, in one transaction. Or if there can, you know, maybe something to do with some form of charge, you know, there will always be bank charges and there will always be queries about bank charges, and you know, this ability to give the individuals some form of empowerment. So I think, you know, one of the primary changes we're going to see happening is people moving from the old command control type environment in call centres to more empowered, and I think they're going to be able to do that because the wealth of information that's available is being tapped for the first time. You know, classically, all the contacts were recorded and nothing was done with them. So the world of analytics helps you bring that data out. The integration of channels means I actually get a complete view of the customer. I understand that actually you're not just someone with a current account, you've got this data and this data. And I think the sophistication of the overall analysis of customers, the models that organisations will run, will mean that there'll be far more data that's available at the point of contact. So the people who are in contact centres will be more than just processing transactions. I think tied into that, you know, there will be a plan that a lot of the true transaction stuff will go to some form of self-service, whether it's in an app or in the web or so, whatever. And so I think it's been a nirvana for a long time that that we want to have the really important conversations with customers. And I think that's what we'll see happening. We'll see that you know, the contacts that are still happening on a one-to-one relationship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be voice. You know, it can still be chat or whatever technology. But when you've got a one-to-one transaction, people will have far more ability to deal with the customer, take responsibility, and to deliver a better service.